Well, things certainly can change with the startup of the Four Nations Facing Off tournament, but for right now, this is a really weird update about one of the top trade pieces in the NHL that we might have even seen in the past 25 years. Seriously, this might have been the biggest in-season trade all millennium, maybe even one of the most significant trades of all time. It's the Mikko Rantanen, Colorado, Carolina swap, and of course, we'd already made a few videos talking about the Carolina Hurricanes POV, how they were in on Rantanen unexpectedly, how they almost traded for Pettersson, they almost traded for JT Miller. Of course, there's a very Vancouver perspective here because I'm a Vancouver dude. But this is another interesting update in regards to Mikko Rantanen because the last time we had spoken about him, we had gone over the idea of the Edmonton Oilers making moves trying to sign this guy Rantanen in free agency. And that, of course, was met with a lot of interesting reception. Hey, you've got McDavid, you've got Draisaitl. Could you seriously add Rantanen if you're Edmonton? How would that even be possible here? And we had described the hoops and hurdles that the Oilers might need to go through to make that work. Anyways, today we are diving into a different conversation about Rantanen that sort of relates to the idea of him becoming a free agent and signing elsewhere, but isn't really just centralized on the destination. Instead, we are talking about the mediation in between. Because earlier, yesterday, Arif Dean published this post on ColoradoHockeyNow.com. Dean's notebook. Could Mikko Rantanen actually get traded again? Now, as always, this show is brought to you by ExpressVPN. Go out there and use the first link in the description to save some money on your VPN, get some free months, and help this YouTube channel in the process. But I'll also leave a link in the description to this article. It's an editorial piece, no doubt about that, but it's a really interesting dive into the situation with Rantanen and what some of the insiders around the league are hearing about when it comes to this guy. Essentially, the question at the beginning is, hey, could Rantanen find himself on the trade block one more time? Sportsnet's Nick Kypreos was one of the handful of NHL insiders who had spent the past couple of months speaking about a Rantanen trade out of Colorado. I, the writer here, Dean, was among the many reporters around the team who thought the idea was outrageous. But lo and behold, Nick Kypreos, TVA's Renaud Lavoie, and others were correct. This entire thing completely changed the way I approach these types of trade boards. NHL insiders, especially the ones who have a better track record, don't usually speak scenarios into existence. Some clickbaity journalists do, but trusted insiders only write about scenarios that have some bit of truth to them. And yeah, ditto on the clickbaity journalists part of that sentence. I'm no journalist. I've said that hundreds of tens of times over the past few years, but clickbaity? Yeah, now you're up my alley. Anyways, let's dive back into what is written about here. Nick Kypreos published his updated trade board on Friday, and the first name on the list was Rantanen. Is this another example of where there's smoke, there's fire? He appeared on last month's trade board, and although Rantanen was dealt to the Carolina Hurricanes, I hear it's not a given that he won't be traded again if Carolina can't get him signed to a long-term deal. The general feeling behind Rantanen being back on the trade board is simple. Carolina gave up a lot to get him, and the assets they moved, particularly an excellent player like Martin Necas, aren't worth a trade deadline rental. You could afford to lose Bunting, and the other assets the Hurricanes traded for a rental like Gensel last year. You're probably willing to gamble 2 picks and Jack Drury. But Necas? Losing that guy for a rental is risky, especially if that rental hasn't gotten off to the best start. If Rantanen isn't a system fit for Rod Brind'Amour and the Hurricanes and his production, if it continues to suffer before the deadline, it would be crazy if Carolina didn't at least entertain the idea of moving him. Now, we can dive into the numbers here. Mikko Rantanen, in 6 games played with the Carolina Hurricanes, has 2 points, 1 goal, and 1 assist. His point production pace went from the 104 points that it was on pace for with his earlier production to now being only on pace for 97. So not only is Rantanen producing less, he is really damaging the long-term projectability of his production this season, and as a guy whose contract is expiring at $9.25 million a year, there was obviously going to be some pushback as to what dollar amount he could have been requesting that Colorado just did not want to give him. This article, I really like it because there's a pretty interesting dive into what Dean believes the entire Rantanen situation is looking like, and a slight explanation as to why everything might be falling into place the way it is. After speaking to several people, the general feeling is that Rantanen is still struggling with the shock value of this whole thing. He didn't want to leave Colorado. It wasn't supposed to happen. The contract negotiations were what they were, but this isn't the first time a superstar player in the prime of his career has tried to play hardball. More often than not, the team ends up making up the difference and the player gets signed. We saw it with Landeskog just a few years ago, albeit he wasn't the same caliber of player that Rantanen is now. I believe Rantanen thought he had time to figure things out before the deadline, but I also think McFarland wasn't going to take that risk. If the Avs woke up on March 8th with Rantanen still in the roster and a deal not signed, the player would have had all the bargaining power. And so, if you wanted to use that as the reasoning as to how Rantanen's production has translated from Colorado to Carolina, and you want to explain why things have taken such a step back, that would make sense, honestly, like the shock factor of it all, the fact that Rantanen wanted to be a Colorado Avalanche, he didn't think he would get moved, he was unexpectedly traded. Not really against his will, I mean, he had no trade protection whatsoever, but he was sent away after he thought that there would be a deal signed. And now he's kind of just trying to get things together, you know, maybe get some chemistry going with Sebastian Aho because, hey, guess what? They're teammates now, and they're also playing on the Four Nations face-off together. He's going to be playing even though he's hurt, so that's going to be an interesting story to follow here if Rantanen is able to actually participate in a meaningful capacity without aggravating whatever it is that's going on. But Rantanen being on the block one more time, we had gone over this song and dance before. Carolina has cap space. This is not the same Jake Gensel situation from last year. They have more maneuverability. But, of course, it would only be necessary for Carolina to start doing their due diligence and seeing if they can make that contract extension work now. They have no time to wait here. This Four Nations face-off tournament seems like the perfect time to get these negotiations to work. Because if you figure it out that you're not actually on the same page and there's no realistic option here, then maybe you have no reason to keep him around, especially if he struggles. Hey, we can trade Rantanen for another star who is locked on for a little bit more term that might actually be a worse player than Rantanen, but who has that cost control and who might actually be able to play better with our system than Rantanen is right now. A point every 3 games for a player of Rantanen's superstar caliber is unacceptable. That guy's not going to get $12 million a year if he plays a point every 3 games like he's doing right now in Carolina. Well, we know he probably will, but that's not what he deserves. We know what he is when he's at his best. He was at his best a few weeks ago before he got sent away. He's great, but just right now, we are not seeing that greatness in Carolina in the slightest. Is it just shock, or is this more of an indictment against Rantanen's ability to adjust in a new system? Marty Necas was good in this system, but he's even better in Colorado. So, what gives? Question of the day, does Rantanen get traded one more time before this season comes to an end? Let me know your thoughts in the comment section below, and read the rest of that article too, by the way. It's a very good one. I hope you enjoyed this video. And bye.